The first thing they told me after I became a park ranger in Yosemite wasn't about bears. It wasn't about mountain lions. It wasn't even about people getting lost. The first thing they told me was this: if you ever get scheduled for the night shift, don't assume you're protecting the same park you worked in that morning. At the time, I laughed. I thought it was another one of those old ranger jokes meant to scare the new guy. I stopped laughing 4 nights later. And if anyone watching this is planning a trip to Yosemite, do yourself a favor. Leave before sunset, because the tourists only know Yosemite during the day. The people who work nights, we know something else lives there. I became a ranger because I love the outdoors. My dad had taken me camping across California my entire childhood. Yosemite was always my favorite place. The granite cliffs, the waterfalls, the giant sequoias. It felt untouched, peaceful, like the world before people. After finishing college and spending 3 years working smaller parks, I finally landed a transfer to Yosemite National Park. It felt like winning the lottery. The first month was exactly what I dreamed about: helping hikers, giving directions, rescuing tourists who underestimated trails, breaking up the occasional bear jam. Everything felt normal, beautiful, predictable. Then Ranger Collins retired. Nobody wanted a schedule. At first, I didn't understand why. Night patrol paid better, less interaction with tourists, cooler temperatures during summer. It sounded perfect. When I volunteered, the entire break room went quiet. One ranger actually looked up from his lunch and asked, "Are you sure?" I laughed. "It's just nights." Nobody laughed back. The schedule change happened on a Tuesday. Chief Morgan called me into his office before my first shift. He wasn't smiling. He slid a manila envelope across his desk. Inside was a folded map, a ring of old brass keys, and a small black notebook. The notebook looked ancient. Its leather cover had almost completely worn smooth. There wasn't any title on it, just faded claw marks across the front. Morgan tapped the notebook. "This stays with you all night." "What is it?" "Our night procedures." I opened it. The first page read, "Night operations for rangers assigned after sunset." Nothing unusual. Until I turned the page. There weren't park procedures. There were rules. 7 of them, each handwritten, different ink, different handwriting, like they'd been added over decades. Rule 1, never answer anyone who whistles after dark. Rangers don't whistle on patrol. I smiled. Creepy. Morgan didn't react. Rule 2, if another ranger calls your name from inside the trees, ask them where they parked their truck. If they don't answer immediately, walk away. I look back up. You guys really commit to the joke. Still nothing. Then Morgan quietly asked, "Do I look like I'm joking?" His face never changed. That's when I stopped smiling. Before leaving, I asked one last question. "Who wrote these?" Morgan hesitated. "I honestly don't know anymore. The first version existed before I was hired. Every chief since then has added something." "What happened to the ranger who wrote Rule 7? He stared at the notebook, then slowly looked out the office window. He never came home. Sunset in Yosemite changes everything. During the day, the park belongs to families, photographers, climbers, backpackers. At sunset, it empties with surprising speed. Campgrounds quiet down. Parking lots clear. The roads become strangely silent. By 9 o'clock, it feels like someone erased thousands of people from existence. My patrol area covered Glacier Point Road, several maintenance routes, and a handful of closed hiking trails. Routine stuff, or so I thought. Around 9:30, dispatch checked in. Unit 12, radio check. Loud and clear. A second voice came over immediately afterward. Unit 12, copy. I frowned. The voice sounded almost identical to dispatch. Same woman, same tone, same radio quality. I answered. "Go ahead." Static. Nothing else. Then dispatch spoke again. "Ignore that transmission." I looked down at the radio. What was that? Several seconds passed before she answered. "You'll learn." 10 minutes later, I reached an old trailhead, closed for restoration. A chain blocked the entrance. Several warning signs hung from wooden posts. Nothing unusual, until I noticed fresh footprints. Someone had stepped around the chain. One person, heavy boots, walking into the forest. Not out. I grabbed my flashlight. The footprints looked recent, less than an hour old. I radioed dispatch about unauthorized entry on the North Ridge Service Trail. Dispatch answered immediately. Negative. That trail has been empty since noon. I'm looking at tracks. Silence. Then, don't follow them. I blinked. What? Return to your vehicle. I looked down the dark trail. The footprints continued into complete darkness. No. If someone's in there. Dispatch interrupted. If they're alive, they'll come back. If they don't, you won't help them. Every instinct told me she was wrong. Someone could be injured, lost, freezing. That's literally what park rangers exist for. I stepped over the chain. The moment my boot touched the trail, the forest became silent. Completely silent. No insects, no wind, no leaves moving, nothing. I slowly turned around. The road behind me was still there. My truck still sat in the parking lot. Yet somehow, it looked farther away. Much farther. Like I'd walked half a mile instead of 2 steps. Then, a whistle echoed somewhere ahead. 3 clear notes. Exactly the same pitch each time. I remembered Rule 1. Never answer anyone who whistles after dark. I wasn't planning to, but then I heard something even worse. A man's voice. Calm, friendly, relieved. Oh, thank God. I finally found another ranger. The voice came from somewhere between the trees. Maybe 50 yards away. I've been lost for hours. My flashlight died. I think I broke my ankle. I swept my flashlight toward the sound. Nothing. Only pine trees. Then the voice came again. Closer this time. Can you help me? I opened my mouth before I remembered Rule 2. If another ranger calls your name from inside the trees, ask where they parked their truck. My heart began pounding. The voice hadn't said my name. Not yet. Then, very softly, Nathan. I froze. I hadn't introduced myself to anyone on the radio. My name tag couldn't be seen from 50 yards away. The voice smiled as it spoke again. Nathan, I've been waiting for you. Every hair on the back of my neck stood up. The voice wasn't loud anymore. It didn't need to be. It sounded close enough that if I stepped between the trees, I'd probably find whoever was speaking within a few seconds. I tightened my grip on the flashlight instead. My training told me to locate the lost person. The notebook in my pocket told me to ask a question first. My mouth had gone dry. Where'd you park your truck? Silence. Not complete silence. I could still hear my own breathing, the crunch of my boots, the distant hum of my idling engine behind me. But the voice stopped for almost 10 seconds. Then it laughed. Not loudly. Not like someone amused. Like someone trying to remember how laughter worked. You don't need to know that. My stomach dropped. I backed toward the trail entrance. The voice matched my pace. Always hidden. Always somewhere behind the trees. Nathan, come on. I'm hurt. I know you're trained to help people. I kept backing away. I said, where's your truck? Another pause. Then, I parked where you parked. Cold spread through my chest. I spun around. My truck was still sitting in the lot. Except, it wasn't alone anymore. Another park service truck sat beside it. Same model. Same color. Same number painted on the door. Unit 12. My unit. I blinked. There had only been one truck when I arrived. Now there were 2. One of them had its headlights on. The other didn't. I couldn't remember which one I'd driven. I crossed back over the chain almost without thinking. The moment both feet touched the pavement, the forest came back to life. Wind, crickets, branches swaying overhead. I looked back toward the trail. Nothing. No voice. No whistle. No movement. As if none of it had happened. My radio crackled. Nathan. Dispatch sounded irritated. What are you doing? I looked between the 2 identical trucks. About a problem. No, she replied quietly. You've got a choice. She didn't explain. She simply said, get into the truck with a broken taillight. Then the radio went silent. I stared. Both trucks looked identical, until I walked closer. One had a small crack in the left rear taillight. The other didn't. I unlocked the damaged one. The keys worked. Inside, everything looked normal. Coffee cup, flashlight, my jacket, half-eaten protein bar. But something felt off. The passenger seat was adjusted farther back than I remembered. The radio volume had been turned almost all the way down, and hanging from the rearview mirror was a wooden carving I'd never seen before. A tiny bear. I don't collect souvenirs. I never bought that. I grabbed it anyway. It felt warm, like someone had been holding it moments earlier. Back at headquarters, nobody seemed surprised. Claire looked at the carving and quietly slipped it into an evidence locker. How many now? She asked Luis. He checked a clipboard. 18. I frowned. 18 what? Luis answered without looking up. Rangers who came back with something that wasn't theirs. Morgan called me into the briefing room. No lectures. No questions. He simply unfolded another page from a notebook. I didn't give you this one earlier. Why? Because nobody believes it until after the first encounter. The page contained only one sentence. Rule 3. If the park gives something back to you, never take it home. I looked toward the evidence locker. The carving. Morgan nodded. It wasn't there yesterday. Where did it come from? He met my eyes. You. I laughed. Actually laughed. This isn't funny. I've never seen that thing before. Morgan slowly slid a photograph across the table. It showed a group of rangers standing beside patrol trucks. The date printed in the corner was 6 years old. I wasn't even employed here yet, but one ranger caught my attention, standing near the back, young, smiling, the same wooden bear hanging from his mirror. I looked closer. The ranger looked strangely familiar, not because I knew him, because he looked like me, not identical, close enough to make my stomach twist. Same height, same dark hair, same scar beneath the chin. I looked at the name beneath the photo. Ranger Daniel Mercer. Status. Missing. That's impossible. Morgan nodded slowly. I know. I flipped the picture over. When did he disappear? During night patrol. Body? Never found. Witnesses? Only his truck. What happened to it? Morgan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the parking lot outside. It's still here. He took me outside. The ranger station had an old maintenance garage tucked behind the main building. Padlocked. No windows. Luis unlocked it. The lights flickered on. Dust floated through the air. There were several retired patrol vehicles inside, covered with gray tarps. Luis pulled one away. Unit 12. Same number. Same cracked taillight. Same truck I'd driven tonight. Except, this one hadn't moved in 6 years. The driver's door still hung open. The keys were still in the ignition. Everything inside was coated with dust. Everything except the steering wheel. Someone had touched it recently. I reached toward it. Morgan grabbed my wrist. Don't. Why? Look first. I leaned closer. There were fingerprints in the dust. Fresh ones. They hadn't been there long. They matched someone sitting behind the wheel. Driving. Leaving. Returning. Without disturbing anything else. I slowly looked down. The floor mat held fresh mud. Still wet. Luis whispered. It came back this morning. That night, I couldn't stop replaying the voice. I parked where you parked. At 3 in the morning, I woke to my phone vibrating. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. There was no greeting, only breathing. Slow, calm. Then, my own voice. Perfectly clear. Nathan. I picked the wrong truck. The line went dead. I immediately called dispatch. No answer. I called Morgan. Straight to voicemail. Then my phone buzzed again. A text message. No sender. Just a photo. It showed my cabin, taken from outside, standing on my front porch. Was someone wearing my ranger uniform? His face wasn't visible, but he was holding something in his right hand. The little wooden bear. I turned toward my front window. The porch light was off. I couldn't see outside. Then, very slowly, someone knocked. 3 soft knocks. Exactly the same rhythm I'd heard in the forest. And before I could move, a familiar voice spoke through the door. My own. Nathan, you forgot something in my truck. I didn't move. Not even enough to breathe. The thing outside wasn't guessing. It wasn't pretending anymore. It was using my voice with perfect confidence. Nathan, I know you're awake. 3 more knocks. Slow, patient, not aggressive, almost polite. I remembered something Morgan had said before ending my shift. If it knows you're inside, don't make it wonder whether you're alive. At the time, it hadn't made sense. Now it did. I forced myself to stay completely still. No footsteps, no shifting weight, nothing. Almost a full minute passed. Then I heard boots crossing the wooden porch. Not leaving, walking around the cabin. One window, then another, as if it were checking every angle. The beam of a flashlight swept across my bedroom wall. Except, I hadn't seen anyone carrying a flashlight. The light stopped outside my bedroom window. I stared at the curtain. A shadow slowly appeared. Human, broad shoulders, park ranger hat. Then another shadow stepped beside it. My blood turned to ice. There were two of them now. Neither spoke. Neither moved. They simply stood there, looking in. Morning couldn't come fast enough. When sunlight finally reached the cabin, I pulled the curtains open. The porch was empty. No footprints. No sign anyone had been there. Until I opened the front door. Sitting perfectly centered on the welcome mat was my ranger badge, the badge I'd been wearing all night. I instinctively touched my chest. Another badge was still clipped to my uniform. I now had two. One warm, one freezing cold. I left the second badge exactly where it was. Morgan was already waiting when I reached the station. "You brought it." I shook my head. "No." "Good." He actually looked relieved. Then he surprised me. "Come with me." He drove us away from the visitor areas, past maintenance roads, past employee housing. Eventually, we reached a section of forest surrounded by an old chain-link fence. There weren't any warning signs, no trail markers, nothing to suggest the place even existed. The gate had 3 locks. Luis unlocked each one without saying a word. Inside, the forest felt wrong immediately. The trees were taller, the air colder. Even the sunlight seemed weaker. I checked my GPS. The screen flashed one message over and over. "No map available. This area doesn't officially exist anymore," Morgan said. It was removed from every public map in the late 70s. Why? Because people kept finding it. That answer made no sense. "You mean getting lost?" "No. I mean, they weren't looking for it." They still arrived. About 200 yards in, we reached the remains of an old ranger station. Not abandoned, erased. The roof had collapsed decades ago. Nature had swallowed most of the walls. Yet something immediately caught my eye. There were no birds. Not one. No insects. No squirrels. Nothing living. Just silence. Morgan noticed me looking around. "Now you know why tourists never come here." I frowned. "They don't because it isn't on the map." He looked at me strangely. "No, they don't because they never see the trail." Inside the ruined station sat an old wooden desk, covered in notebooks. Dozens of them. Every one belonged to a different ranger. Some dated back nearly 60 years. Morgan handed me the oldest one. The first page read, "Night Observation Log, September 18th, 1964. The handwriting was shaky. I heard my partner calling for help. I found him sitting beside the river. He was smiling. He had no eyes. I returned to camp. My partner was already asleep in his bunk. I flipped forward. Every entry became worse. "They've learned our names. They're copying our patrol routes. They don't cross the river anymore. They don't need to." Then the final page, written in huge, frantic letters. "They aren't copying US. We're copying them." "What does that mean?" Morgan didn't answer. Instead, he opened another notebook. Different ranger, different decade, same conclusion. Then another, and another. Every notebook ended the same way. Different words, same idea. None of us were the originals. I laughed nervously. This is some kind of psychological test, right? Nobody answered. Luis simply walked toward the back wall. There was an old bulletin board still hanging there. Most of the papers had rotted away, except one photograph. It showed 12 rangers standing outside this very station. One face immediately caught my attention. Mine, not similar. Mine. Same jawline, same eyes, same scar under my chin, same smile. Except the photograph had been taken in 1981, nearly 20 years before I was born. I couldn't breathe. Morgan quietly said, "You're not the first Nathan assigned to Yosemite." I tore the picture off the board. The back contained handwritten notes. "Replacement successful." Nothing else. I stared at Morgan. "What the hell does that mean?" He finally answered. "We stopped asking years ago. On the walk back, something changed. The forest wasn't silent anymore. Branches snapped somewhere behind us. One step, then another, always matching our pace. Never faster, never slower." I spun around. Nothing. Luis didn't even look. "Keep walking." The footsteps continued. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I counted. There were 3 sets behind us. but only the three of us walking. Then, a fourth. Morgan stopped, so it finally showed itself. I looked around wildly. I don't see anything. You won't. Not yet. The footsteps stopped too. The silence became unbearable. Then a voice drifted between the trees. Soft, gentle, almost affectionate. Nathan. Not my voice this time. My mother's. Exactly as I remembered it. The same warmth. The same laugh hidden beneath each word. Honey, come here. I hadn't heard her voice in nearly 8 years. She died from cancer before I'd ever become a ranger. Every part of me wanted to run toward it. Morgan grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. Don't. Tears were already filling my eyes. That's impossible. I know. It's using her. The voice came again. Closer. My baby. I'm cold. Please. I broke. I took one step toward the trees. The temperature dropped instantly. Not gradually. Instantly. Like stepping into a freezer. Louise tackled me before I could take another step. Something moved between the pines. Not a person. Not an animal. Just a shape. Tall enough that its head disappeared between the branches. It never came fully into view. But I saw one thing clearly. Its face changed. For a split second it looked like my mother. Then me. Then Morgan. Then someone I'd never seen before. Before dissolving back into darkness. Morgan pulled me to my feet. We're leaving. He didn't run. Neither did Luis. But for the first time since I'd met them, both men looked genuinely afraid. And as we hurried toward the gate, I realized the footsteps behind us had started again. Only now, they sounded exactly like my OW and B. By the time we reached the gate, none of us spoke. Not because we were trying to stay quiet, because we were listening. Those footsteps hadn't stopped. They stayed exactly 6 feet behind me. Never closer, never farther away. When I stopped, they stopped. When I started walking, they matched my pace perfectly. I spun around one last time before stepping through the gate. The forest behind us looked empty. The footsteps continued anyway. Morgan slammed the gate shut. Luis locked it with shaking hands. The sound vanished instantly. Morgan exhaled. It can't cross until it's invited. I looked at him. So we're safe. He hesitated just long enough to answer my own question. For today, back at the ranger station, nobody mentioned what we'd seen. Instead, Morgan led me downstairs. I hadn't even realized the station had a basement. A heavy steel door required 2 keys to unlock. Mine didn't fit. Only Morgan's and Luis's did. Inside was a narrow concrete hallway lined with old filing cabinets and shelves stacked with logbooks. At the very end stood another door. Unlike the first one, this one wasn't locked. It had 7 deadbolts, all of them engaged. Someone had written across the steel in thick black marker, "Do not open after sunset." I looked at Morgan. "What's in there?" He answered without emotion. "The reason we work nights.